Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Mytime Sports Show. I'm your host, David Andron, along with co-host James Gamble and the owner of the Global Scouting Bureau. Welcome back, James.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
And today we want to kind of talk about building the foundation of scouting, talking about the grading scale and, evaluating consistency and just the language of professional scouting to be able to help some of these young evaluators learn the proper foundation and what they need to build to become a quality scout.
Sure. Well, I think just like we talk to players about building a foundation of athleticism and things of that nature, it's important for scouts to build a foundation to know what we're going to do each and every day, how we're going to evaluate, what all the information is going to be that we're going to take in, not just the actual viewing of the player, viewing an at bat, viewing a bullpen session, et cetera.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, we want to talk about the grading scale. Professional baseball is a little bit different from college. We all know the 20 to 80 scale. But as a college recruiter, my scale is, a little bit different than when I was a major league scout. In professional baseball, if I take a chance on a 5'8" player and he fails, I lose my job. Whereas in college, you can be a little more, take a little more risk on smaller players. But we talk about the grading scale, that the 20 to 80 scale, and talk a little bit about that as far as, the foundation of scouting.
Again, some of the numbers, and people use different models of scales and they consistently change, but you and I are both talking in the past how Major League Baseball was broken down. 80 being the highest, 20 being the lowest, with the average major league player being a 50. You can change that. I know you and I have talked about a 1 to 5 scale that some companies had used. And we're really trying to say, what is the bottom level of player? What is the top level of player? And that top level of player is basically the best you've ever heard of or seen at the highest level. So it's very hard to get those perfect scores. And then in building out a scouting report, it's where are they today? And then where do you think they can be in the future in the right environment with the right training, with the right amount of time allocated for them. So scores will change where a person's at today versus where they're going to be in 3 to 4 years. That's why the major league teams draft players out of high school, college players. But the high school player has a little more time, is because they're looking at that overall future potential of where they can get him, not where he was at when he was 17 and 18 years old, where he's going to be at 24, 25, 26 years old.
Right. Right.
So again, it all goes down to building that foundation for an athlete, but that goes into the understanding and building the foundation of the scout as well. What is he looking for? So a college recruiter, let's say a Division I recruiter right now, David, I promise you, they're not going out using a 20 to 80 scale and seeing where that player is going to be in the next 2 to 3 years. Heck, they have a portal. They are all building rosters for 1 year. 1 year, that's it. So the old method of I'm going to have a career player at a school and he's going to have the most RBIs in school history, it's going to be really tough for that because guys are bouncing too much. We're in a very, what can you do for me now industry? What have you done for me lately? And if you can't do it right now, I'm going to go somewhere else. And it's not just the players. It's not just the teams. It's the culture of college sports right now. I'm not going to say I love it, but that's kind of where we're at. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Times have definitely changed. There's not a whole lot of, what you call it, commitment anymore to long-term development from the coach's side, as well as, commitment from the players to stay as part of their program.
Sure.
And one of the things that hurts is, as a major league scout, we try to be as honest as possible. We're brutally honest. We don't sugarcoat anything. We're going to tell you exactly where your tools lie. And as a college recruiter, a lot of times they have to build enrollment. So they're going to tell a player, okay, you might come in and start shortstop for me for the next 4 years because you have all these great tools. And then when the kid signs his LOI and shows up to campus, there's 10 other shortstops that are as good, if not better than him. So that's where a lot of times, scouting and evaluating takes a negative hit because, these players are recruited by college recruiters and, they're told things that aren't factual. As a as a scout, one thing we want to really focus on is the integrity of, being upfront and honest. Don't sugarcoat anything. Make sure that we're, giving honest, factual evaluations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that you're pointing out is that let's take the college game, for instance, right now. If a college coach doesn't win, okay, the world doesn't always want to say it, but if he doesn't win in today's world through social media, through television coverage, through online activity, the coach is getting beat up. There's a million fans that think they could do better. They put a lot of pressure. There's a lot of money in this game. So that coach gets fired. That's just the truth. So you win or you lose your job. So when they're recruiting, they're looking at, I need a shortstop. You use the example of a shortstop. So when they see one, he could be my next shortstop. But what happens if he gets hurt? That's one thing. What happens if he doesn't perform well? What happens if, my second baseman goes down? He's shortstop, I can move him over. So when they recruit, they're recruiting multiple of these guys, not knowing which one's going to show up, which one's going to be that game time performer. And that's an insurance policy for that coach. They're not going to go with one anymore. They don't have time to lose a game midweek to develop a player. They don't have time to leave the pitcher out there and work through a jam, which will help them later in the year. But right now they need that win, because that win means everything, unless you're in certain conferences. We can go into more detail on another show, but the whole system is set up, and, winning is very important. At the college level, you have to win. So they want ready-made, plug-and-play players. Okay? But they're going to go get a bunch of them because they're using the past to predict their future. I had 3 guys, 2 didn't work out, 1 had an injury, so I got to be ready for all situations. Well, the players, because they don't really understand everything at the next level yet, nor their families. They think everything is very honest and truthful. They show up being told that they're the future of the program and look to their left and right, and they have 5 other guys, and it's a dogfight. They weren't aware of that. Well, the truth is, to all the players, it's a dogfight. You're going to always be auditioning. Every time you go out, you got to beat somebody out, day in, day out. You're going to have to do it. And so I think a lot of players still learn it the wrong way. There's so many things that we could go into topics. I talk to families all the time, hey, my son's going to beat that guy out. They don't understand what's actually being looked at, what opportunity really is. It's not just showing up on campus. That's not opportunity. Now you've got larger rosters. They're reducing them some, but, when you're young, this goes back to how they play. Your typical travel baseball as a 9, 10, 11-year-old, they're playing with 11 and 12 players. You get to college, they have 34 plus. Okay, I'm going to continue to say plus. They're going to find ways around rules. They're going to have red shirts. They're giving new labels to keep guys. So they're just, the players and their families aren't used to the competition that it takes to compete at this level. So our goal is trying to educate everybody on, hey, look, I hate saying the statement, it is what it is. It is what it's going to be. You're going to have to compete day in, day out. You're going to have to take in the information from college coaches and be able to look at it as a family and make good choices. So as an evaluator, we both believe, I know we do, is in the integrity, being honest with players. Being able to say, look, it's going to be tough. They're bringing in a junior college guy. You're going to have to go in and compete against him. He's got 500 more at bats than you. Okay, where's your versatility? And so understanding the game as an evaluator is going to be able to look at what they have coming in, okay, and say, am I going to have a good opportunity, not counting on somebody to get injured? I don't want players to say, I hope my teammate gets hurt, but to really understand what opportunities I may have at this particular college.
Yeah, and understanding, like you said, what opportunities they may have. A lot of times a college coach or recruiter will tell a kid, only have 3 outfielders or only have four outfielders. So, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to have, a lot of opportunities in the outfield. What they don't tell them is, I just recruited 10 shortstops. They're the best athletes on the field. Only one of them can play shortstop. The other 9 are going to become outfielders, sure. Or different positions. So, understanding that there's more to it than what you see. A lot of players they're starting shortstop in high school never step foot at shortstop at the college level. They all learn to play other positions. Next thing I want to kind of
just want to point out, I think you're right, but there are some good coaches out there. I've met with some of them. I know some of them that are very honest, almost to where it hurts them. But if I take college baseball as a whole, look, it's a very cutthroat business. There are general terms being told to families. They are recruiting for their best interest. That means the head coach is protecting his family, right? He's not. Now, all these players are actually being used a little bit to the best interest of that coach to protect his job, his family. That's the truth. Now, there are some good ones out there, but we want people to understand the why they're doing it. That, hey, they are recruiting lots of players that have versatility. And then we turn that around as as an evaluator and tell players, like, you need to have the ability to move from shortstop to second to left field. And this spreads all the way down to when you're on that 10, 11, 12-year-old team, instead of saying, my son's the shortstop, he's got to play short and hit 3-hole every game. Hey, you know what? Let's teach him how to play this game. It's going to help him from an IQ standpoint. He needs to know how to play left field. And we can even break it down. If you're in left field, what do? Catch pop flies and some ground balls, right? If you're playing shortstop, you're going to catch some ground balls and, some pop flies. Okay, so you're some of the same skill set, but now you can learn where you need to be. You can learn to use your hips, to take better routes. It's not going to hurt kids at a young age to get out there and be able to play multiple positions. I think you would agree with that.
Right. Yeah, totally. My son's a prime example. You got the junior college, and Coach Phil Stevenson, his coach at Dodge City Junior College, told him his first year, hey, look, you can split time at second base, or you can redshirt your freshman year. So he, after thinking about it, he decided he wanted to redshirt, put on some weight, and then through that redshirt season, just by shagging fly balls in the outfield, Coach Phil said, hey, you need to start taking more balls in the outfield. He never played outfield in his life until junior college. If he would have stayed in the infield, he probably wouldn't have played past junior college.
Sure.
He learned how to play outfield, became a really good outfielder, and ended up playing a few years of professional baseball. But when he went into college, at no point in time did he ever think he was going to be playing anywhere other than second, third, or shortstop.
Absolutely.
So it happens, and that's what we want to kind of make sure the parents understand, that hey, just because your kid plays a position in high school, there's a good possibility that he's not going to get to play that position in college. He's going to have to compete, with a lot of different people at that level.
Sure.
Next thing,
there's so much that we can go into on that, and I'm, adding to your point with Drake, he checked a lot of boxes because, again, how much size did he put on between high school and college? We're talking about the building blocks and the foundation of a scout. Drake is David's son. When he came out of high school, how much did he weigh? 150,
145 pounds. Yeah.
Okay. He was thin. Now he could always run a little bit, but now he can really run.
Yeah.
Okay. He threw well, but not elite level. He was undersized. He was thin. I'm not saying weak, but he was, he wasn't as strong. And that redshirt year, because it allowed time, there was so much change that went on in Drake. And I know you were proud of it, because this is where the athlete had been in a good environment. He understood the game. He was able to understand what had to happen. He saw it with his own eyes. I either have to make changes and get better, or the game's going to leave me behind. And I mean, Drake went from, he was like 185, 190. I don't know where he got to, but physically became a specimen. He went from throwing in the low 80s, throwing in the 90s. It was drastic, from being a guy who you would call he's a gap-to-gap guy, to having some serious power where he could hit the ball out of the ballpark. And then his speed went from good to elite. But that happened. I still remember when he was at junior college talking to you, the dude was not just playing college baseball. He was going above and beyond. He was always in the weight room. He was always training. Nutrition was important. Rest was important. There was an entire thing, a routine and environment that was around him that helped him to achieve the level of playing professional baseball. And as an evaluator, we need to see that, and not just see it with our eyes, but we need to learn that through the history and the work ethic and the routines of the kids. That's why it's more than just the physical eye and seeing a player. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I did want to point that out, because you're living an example through your son of how drastic change can take place, not downplaying him at all when he came out of high school, but who he became. That was much, it was after high school. It was 1, 2, 3 years removed from high school. He really became who he was.
Right. Yeah, he was definitely one of those late bloomers, but he's fortunate that he grew up around professional baseball, so he kind of understood the, what it takes to play at that elite level. But even then, he surprised me. I never expected him to put on the weight and the size that he did. But talking about that, let's talk about the language and the some of the terminology as a scout. We talked earlier about,
Sure.
everybody calls you and says, hey, I got a dude. You know, when I'm evaluating, I help, thousands of college coaches across the country find players right now. I'm not going to call that college coach and say, hey, I got a dude for you.
Sure.
I'm going to, be more in depth with, okay, hey, this guy's got a plus arm. He has, positive foot speed. He has arm side run on his fastball. There's a lot of different terminology and language that we use as a scout that goes beyond, hey, I got a dude. Let's talk a little bit about that, what these young evaluators can learn, how to communicate with college coaches and major league scouts, and then, as they work their way up in their careers.
Sure. I think a good point you're making is learning the terminology, but really understanding it. I've been around people that have copied the terminology. They talk it, but if you ask questions, they have no understanding of what it actually is. I think it's important to start off with the basic 5 tools, right? And that's the building blocks of the elite athlete. We all agree that the 6th one, which we'll get into later, is probably the most important, but there's 5 tools. You're looking at, the foot speed, just his overall foot speed. You're looking at his arm strength, and a lot of these can be measured. We have tools to measure foot speed. We can use lasers, stopwatches, things to measure the foot speed. With arm strength, we're going to use radar guns to be able to measure what the velocity is of the throw, even if he's an outfielder, infielder. But we're going to measure those. So foot speed, the arm strength, their fielding. Now it becomes where we have to be able to watch it and see it. There's no real measurement. That's something that we as evaluators have to learn how to look at. How good are his hands? Are they soft? The reads, we're going to get into his defensive ability to play a position is one of them. And being able to learn that those are not something we can measure. And then the last one, the ability hit. And then you put in raw power, which it is. Now it's power production. You can measure some like exit velocity, but it's so much more. The ability to measure hitting is probably one of the most difficult skills to teach an evaluator to do. That's why I think you have to really watch a lot of baseball day in, day out. You have to be able to see guys over and over again off different pitchers, high velocity, low velocity, upper 3/4, lower 3/4, lefties, righties, guys that are, high spin rate, guys that are low spin rate. All of these things come into play. But it all is still going to be going back to those 5 basic tools, the power, the speed, the arm strength, fielding, and their ability to hit. And as time goes on, they're putting more analytics on measuring it, but that's really an after the fact. That's what people aren't noticing. And David, you might want to get into that and we can talk. There's a lot of guys that will bring up spin rate. This guy has high spin rate. Well, that's like 40 years ago was velocity. He throws hard, let's go after him. He throws hard, let's go after him. Spin rate is just a measurement. It's after a guy releases the ball, okay? There's going to be averages, just like there's average heights and average weights. There's going to be above average, which is going to play a little different. Means a hitter would have to have an adjustment. And there's going to be below average, okay? The world right now, which is going high spin rate. Well, how math works is a little bit over, a little bit under. If you're a pitcher, my goal is not to hit the barrel of the bat. I want to miss barrels, right? So a little under, same as a little over, right? As long as I can not be in that average. And that's why, when you're talking the game, everything is going to be averaged. It is going to be a statistic. It is going to be analyzed. The average high school fastball is 78. Well, that's based on seeing a whole lot of arms. Some of them are seniors, some of them are sophomores, some of them are 19, some of them are 15. So there's so much deviation, but that's an average. So, we have to learn what the tools are. I mean, 78, it's not going to get people all excited. But to get to that 78, you had somebody throwing 92 and somebody throwing 58. And I know that sounds terrible, but if you go watch enough baseball, you will see that number show up. Not if you have a pocket radar, it probably won't capture unless it's above, a certain number. But these are going to happen. That's how you come up with averages. So the game will continue to develop and advance through using ways to measure, but it's never going to outperform the scout or the evaluator that goes out there with purpose to help kids, right? To help them advance, watches a lot of baseball to have comparisons. And I know personally that comparison is the thief of joy, but in baseball, comparisons, meaning who can I do a player comp with? And I'm looking at other guys who are already successful. It's not comparing him to Johnny's best friend and he's better than Johnny. It's looking at a player that's successful, looking at the traits and the tools they have and projecting, is he going to be like him, similar to that player? And you may want to elaborate. I know you've been through this as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, Drake had a teammate, years ago in Division II, left fielder, and he was a specimen. I mean, 6'4", just, ran well. He just had that perfect body that you look for as a scout. And I remember at one point in time, you even asked me about his stats because, he's hitting over 300. He had about 20 home runs and things like that, wanting to know if he could play at the next level. And, my answer to you was, no, he can't, because, when you watch him during BP, he would hit the ball over the lights. His exit velocity was, amazing. But when you look at his stats over the season, the weaker teams that had arms that threw below 85, yeah, he dominated. He would hit 400, 450 against those teams. But anytime they faced higher end arms, Central Oklahoma and some of those, bigger Division II schools, anybody that threw over 85, he couldn't touch it. He had such a hole in his swing. And, that just didn't transfer to be able to play at that elite level.
Sure.
And that's kind of what we're talking about when we communicate with scouts. When you called and asked, I would love to have promoted him and say, hey, yeah, I think this kid can go play international professional baseball or independent ball somewhere. But I knew deep down there's no way he could hit at that level. So
that's a great point. I've even been, and I've talked to coaches. Some of them don't like it when I say this because they'll call about, hey, I think this guy is a professional and he had a really good year. And this at the college level. And then I try to, in a nice way, explain that Major League Baseball does not draft good college players. They draft future major leaguers, or that's the goal, right? And if we go look it up right now, about 70% of first rounders get to the big leagues, which means, and look, they're making millions of dollars. 30% don't. And it doesn't mean they're all going to have good careers. It used to be less. It used to be like 50 and 55% of the first rounders. So there's a margin for error because baseball, unlike a lot of other sports, we have an entire minor league system to go through to continue to develop them because the player has to acclimate. That's how tough it is. So if we break it back down to high school baseball, and I'm sure you get this too, my son hit 560 and we're going, yeah, that's great. But everybody in college was one of the best high school players. So how did he do when he faced the best high school players? Not when he faced a midweek game and, he got 4 hits on a guy that was doing front toss. Okay. Those stats don't really matter. They matter, meaning that, look, the kid shows up, he plays, he's a hard worker, things of that nature. But, and you being involved at the college level, even on an ownership side, you don't just recruit the stat. You're recruiting the player, the work ethic, the character of the individual, because, and I'm sure we're going to get into that more, so much of character is being left out and he needs to be more involved because they're going to have adversity. They're going to have to work hard. They're going to have to go through ups and downs. And in today's world of what have you done for me lately culture, how often do we see a guy, he goes 0 for 3 and a coach wants to sit him to let him just, get it out of his head. Now the kid wants to leave. The parents are upset saying it's the wrong program. They're handling it wrong. And so the character of the kid and the family becomes really important when you're recruiting. So I think at other times, you and I are going to get into that, how important it is for the evaluator to really look deep into the soul of the player, the commitment of the player, the character of the player, the character of the family. I mean, people don't like to talk about that, but hey, it's true.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that as well. Sometimes the family gets in the way and, parents overstep and things like that. One thing that I always laugh about, because I hear it all the time, is, we talk about pitchers being able to throw at the elite level, professional level. We tell coaches and parents, hey, I need them to be able to throw 88 plus, 4 pitches in a row. And they always come back with, well, Greg Maddux didn't throw that hard. They don't realize that Greg Maddux did throw that hard when he got into the league and, learned how to pitch and how to move the ball around and how to really carve up hitters as he advanced in his career. But I just think it's funny that, that's one of the things they always throw out, Greg Maddox only threw 85 or 86,
Yeah, well, look, every call I get, every kid that's 5'8" or under is comparing themselves to Altuve. And, the only thing they have in common is their height. Right. That's why understanding the tools become really important. And the foundation of the scout is just as important as the foundation of the athlete, right. At a young age, building those skills. So at the beginning stage of scouting and recruiting, it's really important to teach what they're going to be looking for. And it's not just the analytical numbers, but, seeing the player and seeing inside the player is important.
Right. Yeah, for sure. One thing we want to talk about as a scout is, sometimes we miss, sure. I've scouted a lot of players and, been able to pick out some good ones. Jonathan LaCroix at UL Lafayette, the first time I saw him play in college, there was no doubt in my mind that kid could play at a high level. But then, I go to Tulane as a scout for the Brewers, and, I was told to check out their shortstop, the Prince kid at the time, and I wasn't a fan. He ended up going on being drafted by the Brewers and had a good career. I think he made it up to AAA, but I didn't even think he would make it that far.
Sure.
So being able to be humble as a scout, I think, is important to understand that you're going to miss sometimes, and also understanding the 5 tools that we talked about. I can't tell you how many times I get a call saying, "Hey, I got a kid that's a 5-tool player."
Sure.
There's only one, maybe 2 players in Major League Baseball that are 5-tool players. Mike Trout and I don't know of many others that possess all 5 tools. So being able to understand that,
you're right. There's a few out there, but understanding it all is important. And look, Dave, to be honest, I started in industry back in 1998 with the Global Scouting Bureau simply because, when you are scouting and you're working for one team, I was working for one major league team, you turn in your evaluations to them, and if they don't like the player, there's nothing you can do. Okay, that's both from a contractual standpoint and an ethics standpoint. And my goal was to help athletes advance, period. So, if the Marlins don't like a player, that's fine. There's 29 other ones. Okay. And then we have independent, we have international, and I wrote a book about that as well. As there's a backdoor to the big leagues, which you got missed, and there's still opportunities. As scouts, I was bringing this up because as scouts we miss. Yeah, I can name a lot of players that they missed, that guys that did end up making it, and they missed. They drafted guys, gave them a lot of money, and it was bust. Okay, we're humans. We make mistakes. But I think a lot of that is based on, I know we talked about this in the book, it's peer affirmation. It's overly used. We have to use it. I own a scouting company, so I know how to use it to help players, but it's overly used. How many times, David, do you hear, and I'm just going to name schools, Nichols is on somebody. So if Nichols is on that player, well, now UNO and Southeastern and McNeese and Northwestern, because they're all in the same conference, now they're going to all go pay attention. And if Southeast gets on him, well, Southeast has historically done really well. They've had some 40-win seasons, some regionals. So now guess what? Now UL is going to come in. Now they're all going to swear that they're not, but UL is going to show up. And when UL shows up, now La Tech's coming in and Tulane's coming in. And guess what? If they end up liking him, I know who's coming in. And that's the boss. The boss being LSU. Everybody can get mad, but when they show up, they've got the stroke, and you'll see it. That's why where there's smoke, there's fire. I get it. But we want to help teach the evaluators not to go off of peer affirmation. And I'll give specific examples. I won't take up too much time, but I was scouting for a major league team, and I was in Korea, and I was literally 25 years old, didn't know what I was doing. And the major league general manager would ask me who else was at the game. My thoughts were, why does it matter? Why are you asking me who's at a game? I'm here. I'm watching the player. I'm telling you he's good. You should sign him. And he goes, who else is there? And when I would name the right person, let's say I would say Bill Bavasi, which was well-respected, older than me, had more experience. The next thing you know, my boss is flying in. And at that time, I had no idea. I was like, oh, now we got him to come. But they weren't really they weren't using my evaluations to go off of. They were using peer affirmation. Somebody with a lot more experience had shown up to see that kid. Therefore, we must send out our guy, which we trust more than little old James Gamble, who's just a kid. That's our grunt.
Right.
Well, in our book, we started coining the phrase more players move in this game based on peer affirmation than anything else. And what we're trying to explain to recruiters and evaluators is we have to learn the game not to go off of that peer affirmation. You didn't meet your wife. I know your wife. You didn't go to 5 people and say, who else is on my wife? And then start evaluating, or you're going to go after her based on the other individuals that went after her or that are with her. That's a terrible, terrible model. Right. But it's the number one reason players move. It's peer affirmation. And I have coaches all the time that'll swear it's not. Literally say, no way, James, that's not how we do it. And I'll say, okay, well, I'm just letting you know, this guy that's playing at this junior college, he's from your area. Well, another team in your conference is flying in to go see him. And they quickly go, well, do you have his number? But I just use peer affirmation. They just don't understand the psychology behind it on what's motivating them to go see the player. It's not what they should be looking for. They have a fear of missing out, right? They don't want to miss out. And whenever guys commit players that everybody's on, it's a CYA effect. They're covering their butt. If he doesn't work out, they get to say, well, 26 other major league teams were on him. He was ranked. Well, I really don't care about his ranking. I care about where are his tools, how do I project him, what do I think he can be, and I understand that I could be wrong.
Right.
And that's kind of what we want to teach to the evaluators and scouts.
Right. Again, James, thank you for being on this episode with me. And, guys, we'll be back for another episode on the 6th tool, talking about the mental makeup of the athlete, awesome. And then the body types that we look for in scouting. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see y'all next time.
Thank you for having me.